we will talk about what we call phase one, so the WPMN phase of getting a OECD guidance document or test guidelines generated. We will go through, first of all, what the program is for NanoHarmony and also for today, just to reiterate it for the people that weren't here last month. So next slide, please, Sean, I think. So today, as I said, it's about phase one, as we call it. Sean will get back into the introduction about what the phases are as we've named them. This is about today in terms of how we get to the from the project proposal to the SPSF. So through the initial phases until it goes to the WNT and really into the OECD process. Next slide, please, Sean, and then I think you can take over from there. We just want to capture people who we have here and get you used to using Mentimeter. So Sean will drive that from the near side. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Klaus, and good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, as Klaus mentioned, we will be using Mentimeter today. So I'm sure many of you by now have experienced Mentimeter. You can either open a separate window on your current device or use your phone or another device. And if you just go to www.menti.com and using the code 10128929, and then as the questions come up, they should appear on the Menti, and you're able to answer those questions. If you're ever in doubt, the code should be at the top of all of the slides that you need to use Mentimeter on, and it's also, Nicoline has just put it in the chat for everybody as well. So just to give people a really short introduction to NanoHarmony, and this is going to be a very quick introduction. There's already a lot of information online about NanoHarmony, and indeed quite a few of the previous project webinars online. If you look on YouTube and just look for NanoHarmony, you'll find them, which gives good introductions to the project. But we thought we'd just have a brief reminder here about what the NanoHarmony aims are. And so NanoHarmony itself is taking a range of inputs from different ongoing activities, from different stakeholders, from regulatory bodies, standardization bodies, and sort of available data, methods, and information, and bringing it together to develop and validate some new test methods for OECD test guidelines and guidance documents. We're using this as an opportunity to also create a network that we can interact with all relevant stakeholders by running events such as this and other events. And eventually we want to develop a structure that will translate science into test methods for use in regulatory compliance in a more efficient and better way. Coming out of NanoHarmony, we will have some new or adopted OECD test guidelines specifically designed towards testing of nanomaterials. We will hopefully have improved the cooperation between scientists, industry, the OECD and other standardization bodies and regulators, and all with the aim of faster implementation of bringing scientific results into regulation. So test guidelines. Most people already know this, so again, just a really brief run through. So test guidelines and guidance documents are there to respond to a regulatory need. They support the uptake of new or complex methods by producing relevant and sufficient guidance on testing, interpreting data, and how that can be reported via templates. It's about introducing harmonized testing methodologies that are robust and reliable, that are also mindful of animal welfare considerations, and also considering the economic implications of testing. So trying to make sure that testing doesn't become overly expensive, and to make sure that these are also as broadly accessible as possible. OECD member countries are the ones that agree on the final test guidelines and guidance documents. And you'll hear a little bit more about this as we move through this webinar and indeed in our future webinars as well. So within the NanoHarmony project, there are a number of test guidelines, both in human and ecotoxicity and phys-chem characterization that are being worked upon. And these are test guidelines that are either completely new or are being adopted to make them specific for the use of nanomaterials. One of the things as a project we're most interested in is the timeline of how these test guidelines proceed through the OECD WPMN and then obviously OECD WNT. And as you'll see from this timeline, we've just marked on here the timeline of the actual test guidelines that NanoHarmony project is working on. But obviously this is the same test guideline route that all new test guidelines will currently go through. And as Klaus mentioned, within NanoHarmony, we've split these into a variety of phases. So we have a total of 4 phases. What we're looking at today is phase 1, which is from the project proposal to the SPSF. Our last webinar was on phase 4, which was the actual test guideline use in industry. And we're going to have a future webinar next month on phase 2 and 3, and then a follow-up webinar after that on phase 0, which is his initial idea. But as one of the aims of NanoHarmony is to look at how we can make this process more efficient, how we can get test guidelines through quicker, you'll see that all of the webinars have that as a common theme. How can we have these test guidelines developed in a more efficient, cost-effective and timely manner? And over to you again, Klaus, for the aims of today's webinar.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. So today, we really want to identify and understand what the challenges and barriers are in getting the test guideline development process going. We need to get feedback from the stakeholders about their experience of developing and using test guidelines. So today's webinar will obviously be about the people that get to review the proposals that come in, what's missing in them, etc. Or if you are a proposer, what questions did you have that you didn't expect, and have other people dealt with those in smart ways, either upfront or in their replies. It's also about working out what was it that had to be put in place before you could really start. So the way we will use that within NanoHarmony is to try and gather that together, specifically for nanomaterials, but probably also applicable to any other new technology or advanced material that comes through and will need new guidelines to go alongside existing guidelines in order to provide testing and data that goes into risk assessment and regulation and registration. It's about establishing and sharing the best practice to help future guidelines be developed as efficiently, smoothly and quickly as possible. So also about, where we can, provide some feedback into the OECD process about how the process can help and be smoothed out for future test guidelines if we all getting stuck on the same points or delays. And it's about bringing together all the different stakeholder groups, which we'll see in the next Mentimeter whether we've successfully done today, to try and improve how this whole process goes for all of us. So we can take that forward and get the science to keep up with the regulatory need for data and multiple mutually acceptable data platforms within the OECD's test guidelines to be fulfilled as fast as possible. Next slide, Sean. Which I think takes us to who's here today. So if you go to your Mentimeter, you should see that be ready. And we are about 60 people now, so you can see in the bottom corner as it's counting up how many has replied. Again, the code and the website is at the top of the slide. If you haven't logged in yet, you can, as Sean said, either do it on a phone or via a separate window on your computer if you've got multiple screens. I'm assuming size reflects the number of people from each country. 21. We'll just give people a bit of time here to get it to work, because the next slide is the really important one to find out if we've managed to get all levels of stakeholders in here. So not to spoil the next slides, but the format we will use, just so you know the practicalities as we go forward, is there will be 3 talks from within NanoHarmony, each going through the details of how a particular test guideline has moved through phase 1, getting to different stages of completion towards going into WNT, but all being very close. Each of those we will have a session of questions afterwards. We will run that from within in the chat. So if you have a question as the talk goes on, just put it in the chat and we'll take them in order once the talk's finished. You don't have to type out your whole question. We'll call upon you to explain it. So you just need to kind of type in that you have a question and roughly what topic area it is. 39. So that's as many as we're going to get. 61 people here. Probably is. It's been there for a bit. Okay, do you want to move on to the exciting bit, Thomas? So you should in Mentimeter now see a choice of who you think you are. You can only pick one, I'm afraid. So pick the one that suits you best. Good. See if we can beat 39. It's a nice split for this phase, I think, because most of the people on the expert groups and the commenting groups will be from these 2 majorly represented groups, I guess. But it's nice to have industry here as well to be able to input on what input they would like to have to this phase. One missing. So I think you have to scroll down and click submit. I can't remember what I did now. It's not just enough to click the radio button. There's a submit button at the end. There we go. Good. Excellent. We've all become Mentimeter capable. So next slide, please, Sean. I've kind of gone through some of this. Is a quick walkthrough of 3 examples to kind of spark the discussions. Each of these test guidelines are nearly through phase 1, are already through phase 1, but they've had different experiences on the way. But if you've had any that are similar or different as we go through, then please feed them in. This is not about just discussing these 3 test guidelines experiences. This is about getting as many experiences captured as we can. There will be some Mentimeter questions and open debate at the end. So as I said, we'll try and keep each of these slots moving to about 20 minutes and then have some time at the end. Put your stuff in the chat and I'll invite you in to speak as many as we can get through in 20 minutes. Then we'll take note of the rest. It's all being recorded, and any questions we don't get to, we'll capture right at the end. There's a sort of free text exercise in Mentimeter there, which will capture it. So if we didn't get to your question, you can put the long text in there and we'll deal with them afterwards offline. As you can see in the top left, the webinar is being recorded. It's really so we can put it onto YouTube afterwards, so the people that couldn't be here today can go back and learn. Previous webinars are available there if you've missed them, and they cover all aspects of the project, including these 5 phases that we'll go through. Thank you, Sean. Next. So the 3 speakers today is Rachel Smith from UK Health Security Agency, previously called Public Health England. Maria Luisa Fernandez Cruz from INEA in Spain, and Isabella De Anglias from ISS in Italy. We will go through them now, and they'll each share their own screens. So the chat should be open for you to start recording your questions in as we go through. Do you want to stop sharing, Sean, and then we can get Rachel's slides up? Sorry.
Is that showing my slides? Can you hear me and can you see the?
No, I can see you. I can't see your slides yet.
I can't see the slides. Right, let me.
Here we go.
Is that in the right?
Yep, it's
Brilliant.
Perfect.
Brilliant.
All yours. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks very much for the introduction, Klaus, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody. As Klaus said, my name is Rachel Smith. I'm a toxicologist in a nanotoxicologist, strictly in the toxicology department at the UK's Health Security Agency. And what I'm hoping to do today is to talk about a project on the development of a guidance document on the determination of concentrations of nanomaterials in biological samples for ecotox and toxicity studies, which is currently at WNT and is project 110. As Sean and Klaus have explained, one objective of the webinar really is to learn about experiences with test guidance development processes and understand the barriers that have been encountered and lessons that can be learned. And the focus today is on phase 1, which is really from initiating the project at WPMN to SBSF production and hopefully approval at WTM. So I'm talking about the sort of project from this perspective. For those who are not aware of the project, I'm going to give a quick summary of the project, and then I'm going to look at progress through the phases. And whilst I don't want to give away all the conclusions from the beginning, essentially we had quite a smooth progress through this phase. So I'll really be focusing more on those aspects which I think in hindsight have helped, rather than identifying many specific barriers, because I think we've had, as I say, a smooth ride so far. So I'll just start with a sort of brief introduction to the project. This really came about following discussions with people involved in other projects at OECD, in particular initially the project looking at toxicokinetics. And we started having discussions about the need for appropriate techniques and approaches for determining concentrations of nanomaterials in biological samples that toxicokinetic studies would produce. And we ended up discussing this with in relation to other test guidelines on things like bioaccumulation. And we felt that it wasn't really appropriate to have all this sort of technical information in each of these test guidelines. And what would be really useful would be to have a single guidance document which would provide useful input to that could be used by a wide range of different test guidelines and guidance documents covering human health and sort of ecotox, and also sort of in vitro studies. So that was the sort of overall objective. So the aim really is to produce a guidance document to give guidance, to assist in things like the choice of what sort of basic technique to use, things like single particle ICP-MS or microscopy techniques or ICP-MS or other chemical techniques, advice on what are appropriate sample preparation protocols, and also very importantly the type of validation approach to ensure that you have robust and useful data produced from the study. And that we want to do this for different biological matrices, because we obviously want to cover this range of different tox and ecotox projects, and also to cover a range of nanomaterials types and sizes. Our initial focus is on metallic nanoparticles, but the aim is to address other materials such as carbon-based nanomaterials to the extent that it's possible, given the current sort of state of that art, and really to provide information on the strengths and weaknesses of the approaches and details of their constraints, including things like limits of detection, which are very important in terms of experimental design, and also covering aspects such as the robustness and reliability, and also how you deal with background levels, and for some materials, how you address the fact that dissolved nanoparticles may then reform, how you might address that within your sort of context of your ecotox or toxicity study. Because we felt really that guidance in this area would help in planning studies and ensuring appropriate protocols are used really to produce meaningful results. So that's the background, the sort of scientific overarching sort of background. The project is led by the UK, and we have some support for the project by NanoHarmony and Task 4, in particular support from input from the University of Plymouth and from NFA in Denmark. So that's the background to the project. I know that Sean has introduced the sort of timeline, but I just wanted to sort of go back over this a little bit. For nanomaterials, we're in a different position than for most chemicals. For most chemicals, if we want to develop a test guideline or a guidance document, you go straight to WNT. So you start in this sort of on the right-hand side of the process. But for nanomaterials, we have this additional step where we go to the working party on manufactured nanomaterials. So essentially looking at this phase 1, we're really looking at the stage from WPMN preparations for the initial project proposal, because it's necessary to have a project proposal at WPMN and for that to be agreed. And then the drafting of SPSFs at WPMN and commenting rounds, and these have to be agreed by WPMN before they can then be submitted to WNT. But this initial phase also includes this SPSF commenting rounds and approval at WNT. So this is the sort of range that we're looking at, but I'm also going to talk a little bit for this project about the sort of initial steps before project proposal was started at WPMN. So just to go quickly through our timeline, as I said, the process was very smooth. There were no real contentious aspects to it. We submitted a project proposal to WPMN in December 2018. Comments were requested. We addressed those comments, presented the project at WPMN in 2019. So this is the initial WPMN project phase in blue. And then following that approval, we went into the next stage, which is the SPSF at WPMN phase. We submitted our draft SPSF to WPMN and also discussed it with a sort of pardon me, an ad hoc expert group, the steering group on testing and assessment, and had a couple of commenting rounds before presenting it again at WPMN and getting agreement from them on proceeding. We then went into submitting the SPSF to WPMN in November of 2020, and then went through a sort of commenting round before it was approved in April 2021. So overall, it took us 2 to 3 years. There were some issues, clearly, during this time. There was COVID, you may have spotted that, and also we were affected a little bit by WPMN's change of organizational sort of meeting plans, in that originally WPMN had always met in February, but it was moving towards June as its regular meeting slot, which it now has. But because of COVID, it was a September spot. So we were a little bit affected by that, but we probably could have made it a little bit shorter. Typically, to develop a sort of test guideline or guidance document at WPMN, you'd institute an ad hoc expert group. This would involve the Secretariat seeking from all the member countries some sort of nominations, which is very important if you have a very detailed and very scientifically specific project that you need to get, and there are a few experts in the area, but in our case we speeded up this sort of process by effectively using the WPMN steering group on testing and assessment as our sort of expert group, as it's quite a wide area, and we felt we had enough expertise within that. So that was one way in which I think we did manage to speed up the process a little bit. So I just wanted to say something about written comments and commenting rounds. A lot of what happens at WPMN happens within the meetings. So although we only got written comments from 2 member countries for our WPMN project and 3 for the initial draft SPSF, that doesn't reflect the sort of interest and the questions that were asked. And it was a very useful thing to be able to discuss it in the sort of live in 2019. It was a little bit more restricted clearly in 2020, but overall we felt we had very supportive and technical and a few technical comments made by the member countries for those commenting rounds. I think a learning point perhaps is that when you move into WNT, things can get a bit more formal. There's an expectation that member countries will respond to say whether they're generally supportive or otherwise. So although we felt that having these earlier rounds had been very helpful, and quite a few of the responses from the member countries to our SPSF at WNT commented on the fact that they had been clearly dealt with and they were happy with the responses from WPMN, which was very useful. Don't be surprised if you get a few. I'm using politically in a sort of very loose sense to indicate some very unexpected sort of comments, which meant that we had to spend some more time dealing with them than perhaps were expected. But I think you can't always predict what's going to happen. But we did spend a lot of time preparing the ground for what we thought might be the important sort of points. But I think in reality, perhaps some of the things that I felt smoothed the process for us more were things like overall familiarity with the WPMN WNT process. So I've been a member of the UK delegation to WPMN beforehand, so I was aware of the way it worked, the way it was possible to have informal discussions with people, to raise issues, which was incredibly helpful, especially at the very early stages. I also have a good working relationship with both of the UK's national coordinators to the test guidance programme, one of whom works in the same organisation and the other at DEFRA, and they were involved from a very early stage as well. So I think that provided a good, strong background to the development of the project and helped see it through. What was also very, very useful was discussions within the EU Malta initiative, which were held early in 2018, probably April, I think, and later on in November. And these gave us an initial, I suppose, an easy forum in which to share some early ideas on our vision for this guidance document. But they also helped us clarify objectives. We had some perhaps more testing questions there than at any other stage, which were really about some of the technology and also the breadth of the project. So they helped us clarify the objectives. They also helped identify things we needed to focus on, such as coordination with other OECD projects, because clearly, as I've mentioned, we're aiming this guidance document to support other guidance documents and test guidelines. And also the need for clear planning. And also very, very importantly, because the Malta initiative led to various project proposals, it led to the possibility of financial support for some aspects of the project, which we did achieve through the NanoHarmony project. although I haven't mentioned it here, that one of the other important things in relation to the Malta initiative was that we had some chance to interact with regulators at a certain level, which, whilst it didn't do a sort of thorough, I suppose, prioritization of all the different projects that might be useful from a regulatory perspective, it did allow you to sort of test to some extent the regulatory interest at a very early stage, which I think was very important. So I think they're the main things I wanted to say, but I think a lot of this early probationary this early preliminary work was very important, and having a good working relationship with the national coordinators is very good. And so the only last thing I want to say, which is really, please try and not do what we did. Avoid the rookie mistake of using the wrong SPSF template in your project, which was we thought we were doing so well, and then the Swiss pointed out we'd used the wrong template, which meant we had to spend well, not an enormous amount of time, but putting all our text into another template and writing another section. But other than that, we had quite a nice smooth journey through this process. So I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. I'm not going to comment on which country spotted the mistake in the format. I think that's really good, and it shows how much preparation matters in these cases, and how the network that you have around it really helps. There's one question from Hedwig. Hedwig, I don't know whether you just want to come on and speak it out.
Yes, I can do that.
Thanks
for the nice overview. I was wondering, how do you start such a process? Does it start with the need for guidance? So, for example, with the example you mentioned about measuring nanomaterials in tissues or in other compartments, I can imagine there's also a need for guidance how to do this. Or does it start with a novel technique that is now ready for standardization and that you would like to apply to the OECD?
That's a very interesting question, Hedwig. I think I think there's a variety of ways in which projects get sort of initiated. As Sean said, we're going to have another webinar about that sort of phase 0 component of the whole process later on in the year. But I think ours, I think we understood that, especially our initial focus was very much on single particle ICP-MS. We understood that was at a useful stage for use in this context. But I think it came less from it being useful to there being a need for some of these projects, even if some of the techniques weren't always ideal, because I think for some materials, you may still be, if you wanted to actually determine the concentration of individual particles in something, for some materials, the only option now is still microscopy, which would be very complicated and very difficult. And so I think it was just to give the best input we could, given the available technology at the time. So it was a bit of a mix, really. Single particle ICP-MS and then the need for other projects.
And is it then also possible in this process to get other experts involved?
Oh yes. I mean, I think what is very useful, and when you, as I mentioned, we used an expert group, the steering group on testing and assessment at the WPMN. But once you're at WNT, typically a project would have its own ad hoc expert group where you would be seeking out experts to assist, especially in areas where you might not be so expert. So we have had, following our sort of approval at WNT in April 21, we've had a meeting of our ad hoc expert group, and we've also sought input from experts through the NanoHarmony project, through a couple of workshops we've had on single particle ICP-MS and also on carbon-based materials. But I think it depends a lot on what sort of project. Ours is sort of very wide-ranging in some senses, in terms of trying to cover a lot of materials and some different techniques. So we need a wide expertise. I think for some projects which are very, very specific, that you need a different type of expert, but you definitely absolutely do need to get all this expert input.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And I think one of the things you said there, Rach, was you had a shortcut to your expert group, but it is one of the things that can take people time, because those experts, you might find them, but they have to be nominated through the OECD system, which just takes time. Which I think we might hear about in one of the next ones, so we can save that nugget for later. The other bit that you mentioned, at least yesterday when we prepared, was that you had the benefit of the person, the national contact point, being, you know, down the corridor in your organisation. I guess you're not the best person to answer how you find those people if they're not down the corridor, but you are in an organisation that houses the UK's national expert, and that's probably the same across most countries, that it will be your sort of organisation that houses that expert.
It's usually a government organisation. I think if you go to the OECD website, that's probably one of the easier things to find, is the list of national coordinators. If you know that that's what you've got to type into the some sort of search engine, that's what you want, that the national coordinators to the test guideline programme, and then you'll get your full list of your national contact points. And I would recommend that anybody who's thinking about trying to, or has developed a technique that they think would be potentially useful in terms of developing into a test guideline or guidance document, to get in touch with those people, because this is their role, and they're very good for sort of immediate sanity checks. And they will, yes, thank you, Hannah Littler, who we do have our DEFRA coordinator on the environment side actually online, so she's put the link in, which is great. Thanks, Hannah. But yes, so I think it's very important, and they're very good because they also know what other projects are going on, and I think that's one of the things that sometimes you might be aware or might be working on a project that you think has potential, and maybe there's another project already going on that may be very similar or may overlap, that you might be able to contribute to. So I think they're always very worthwhile contacting and speaking to about projects. Yeah,
excellent. Thank you. We'd probably better move on to the next one, so we can take any follow-up questions at the end. Thank you very much, Rachel. And Maria Louisa, if you want to share your slides. It would be a shame to not get to the end of all three. And there will be, as I say, a collection of undebated ideas at the end if we run hot. All yours, thank you.
Okay, you can see it, no?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to present the project proposal that is co-led by Spain and France, and it's the adaptation of OECD test guideline 201, 202, and 203 for the determination of the ecotoxicity of manufactured nanomaterials. This OECD project proposal is being developed in the NanoHarmony project in the task 1.9, and our aim is to generate this sufficient information and the scientific evidence to support the development of a guidance which will be included as annexes to the OECD guidance document number 317, which was published in July 2020. This is the guidance document on aquatic and sediment toxicological testing of nanomaterials. In this task, we participate 3 groups, of course, from France and from Spain, which proposed the project proposal. Spain is the task leader. We are at the INIA, which is a National Institute of Agriculture and Food Research and Technology, which now pertains to the CSIC. And we are dealing mostly with test guideline 203, the fish acute toxicity test. The French group is INERIS, which is the French National Institute for Industrial Environment and Risk, and he's responsible of the development of test guideline 201, freshwater algae and cyanobacteria growth inhibition test. And we invite the University of Aveiro in Portugal to participate in this task for to be responsible of the development of the guidance 202, the Daphnia acute immobilization test. In this slide, I show you a summary of the timeline since we submit the project proposal to the WNT in December 2018 up to now April 2022, where we hopefully expect the approval of the SPSF at the WNT. As you see, and as Rachel and the other presenter show you, we have different steps. First is the project proposal, after the SPSF at the WNPNN, and the SPSF at the WNT. And also you need to look for funding. For us, the critical step was the project proposal, as we show this as annex to a guidance document that was already published. So we need to really explain the necessity of making this annex to complement, to develop further this guidance document. And our story started because the French and these two groups of France and Spain were participating in the NanoRec 2 H2020 project, and we identified a lack of data about the performance of this test guideline when they are applied to manufacturing materials. And looking at different databases and OECD dossiers, the data published under Marine and NanoRec, we observed that there was an enormous scarcity of data, and that the data were a result of different protocols. The species were different, the exposure period. There was not something very homogeneous, and we identify this need to implement a guidance document on how to perform this test guideline. Also, we need to address the necessity from a regulatory point of view of this test guideline, and these three test guidelines are very important to assess the hazard for the aquatic organism under different regulations, like as REACH or the biocide product regulation, plant protection products, and also for the classification and labeling of the substance. And what we wanted with our project, what we wanted to develop is that at the end we could collect data in a systematic and comparable way, what at this moment we will not able to do, to assess the current protocols for their applicability to different types of nanomaterials, and to improve the protocols and assess their transferability and reproducibility across laboratories. And what we proposed was not the development of new test guidelines, but to include the results of the project in annex of this guidance document 317. The process of the guidance document are easier and quicker procedure. There are most effective a most effective way to ensure that the obtained results are quickly and effectively translated to regulation, and it ensures an easiest acceptance by the WNT. So we address in the project proposal for each of the test guidelines the problems we wanted to solve and how to solve them. For test guideline 201, we identified that the cell count and the biomass method that are usually needed for this interfere with the nanomaterials. We also observe possible shading effects of the nanomaterials, which lead to a reduction of growth due to the lack of light, and for possible formation of the heteroagglomerate of algae and the nanomaterials, and this could affect the measurements. Also, the appropriateness of the limit concentration was also a problem that we wanted to solve. And what we propose is to work with 1 or 2 algal species with different nanomaterials of different properties, and develop protocols where we will assess methods for cell count or estimation of biomass. And once we have developed a protocol, to see on its transferability and repeatability among different laboratories. For test guideline 202, the main problems were how to assure a constant exposure concentration to the nanomaterials and the appropriateness of the use of the limit concentration. And what we propose is to test different nanomaterials of different properties, study the effect of the media composition and its characteristic, to study the effect of the test vessel, and also the appropriateness of the use of the limit concentration. To develop good protocols for the different nanomaterials, or for one of them, and assess the transferability and repeatability among laboratories. And for the test guideline 203, more or less are the same problems as for the Daphnia and the procedure also. So this was very important to address in the project proposal, and yeah, to explain why this need of this project, and also from a regulatory point of view. We sent our project proposal in December 2018, and after the commenting round in the WPMN, we have the project approved in February 2019. In the meantime, we look for funding. We also participate in the Malta initiative, and here we discuss on the necessity, and yeah, all these slides were also shown at this meeting, and we could enter in the project proposal submission of NanoHarmony, which was approved in April 2020. The kickoff meeting was in April 2020. Once the project started, it was very important to set an ad hoc expert group with members of the WPMN and regulatory organisms such as ECA, the Joint Research Center, and the OECD, also members from industries and researchers. And very quickly, in November of the same year, of the start of the project, we have our first workshop to address the gaps for conducting these 3 test guidelines with the nanomaterials. And it serves, all the feedback we received serve us to propose an SPSF, and we sent it to by mid-November to the WPMN. We have the discussions and the commenting round. No, the discussion of this SPSF draft was in June 2021, and later on we have all the commenting round, which allowed us to do the revised version and to submit an SPSF to the WNT in November last year. We also had a second project workshop with our expert group just after this submission, to update them on the protocols we were already developing with the project. And it also served us to answer in the commenting round at the WNT. And now we are expecting for the meeting in April 2022. Yeah, that's all. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I don't see any questions yet, so I'll take the chair's prerogative and ask you one. You had to set up your own expert group. How long time did that take, and where did you start? Did you start with advice from the OECD on who should be on it, or did you just make it up as you went along?
Bueno, this was also, it was from the NanoHarmony project. Also, we have the help of Work Package 2 of the NanoHarmony project, and we also have some indication from the OECD and also other experts that we know, and we address. It was a work of many people to have this this group.
Yeah. And how long does it take from you have your list for the OECD to kind of get them approved and invited?
I think it started, the project started in April, and it was in November, so
okay.
not too much.
No.
Yeah.
Good. And if you hadn't had NanoHarmony to kind of put the structure around and the workshops, which bits do you think would be the ones you would have to prepare yourself earlier to make sure that the whole thing worked? Which bits were the most important to make sure the process ran smoothly?
If we don't have any funding.
Well, funding you would obviously have to get, but within NanoHarmony, we've had the workshops and everything else kind of organized, and the expert groups. So which bits
Normally,
of that have been most important?
Normally, you have to have a good communication with Mark Gonzalez, who is the responsible at the OECD for this OECD test guideline, and she can help you also to make this workshop. If not, you can do as for another project, any kind of project. You contact your experts and you organize a workshop.
Yeah, good. I'm not seeing any questions come up, but if somebody doesn't want to type and want to just pipe up, that's fine. Otherwise, we'll move on to Isabella, and then we'll take sum up questions at the end. Okay. First, second, third, sold. Okay. Thank you very much, Maria-Lisa. Thank you. Take your slides down, and Isabella can get hers up.
Hello.
Welcome. Hello, Isabella. I hear you loud and clear today. That's good.
I'll try to share my screen. Hoping will be okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
See the screen.
I'll put yes in presentation mode. Is it okay?
Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Klaus, and thank you all of you. Good afternoon. It's the afternoon for you. And as for the other talks from Rachel and Maria Luisa, my presentation focuses on the part that we followed in implementing our project proposal, starting from the original idea to the submission of the SPSF, hoping to be useful for future applications. I wish to emphasize that our proposal is a new guidance document for a two-step in vitro approach to assess the intestinal fate of ingested nanomaterials. A preliminary discussion about the use of non-animal methods in nanotoxicology has been held at WPMN since the early years of its activity by a dedicated steering group, the SG7. In general, OECD considered the use of in vitro methods appropriate for other assessment of nanomaterials in line with 3R principles. In particular, the importance of alternative in vitro approach in toxicokinetic investigation was highlighted during the OECD expert meeting on toxicokinetics of manufactured nanomaterials. And after this meeting, European Community, in particular GRC, elaborated a proposal for a new guidance document for nanomaterial assessment with in vitro methods. However, due to the resource constraints, this proposal was removed from WPMN program of work in 2018. And my delegation, Italy delegation, strongly convinced of the regulatory relevance of this topic, offer its willingness to revise the project, elaborating a new and more complete proposal for a guidance document on in vitro oral exposure assessment in line with some regulatory requests for ECHA and also EFSA. First of all, the first step of this activity was to prepare the draft proposal using the specific OECD template. It was submitted as usual to OECD WPMN in December 2018, and presented during the plenary session on February 2019. It wasn't immediately included in the WPMN program of work because some questions, some points were raised from other delegation, but after about 2 or 3 rounds of comments and also some teleconferences with WPMN SGTA group on the group on testing and assessment, the proposal was included in the in June in the work plan of WPMN. Actually, comments are really a key aspect in the proposal journey. They are, in my experience, in our experience, they are often very detailed, and it is important to respond in a clear and complete way by written answers that are available after the compilation in the OECD restricted space shared with all the delegation. Definitely, in my experience, they are very helpful in identifying strengths and weaknesses of the proposal. In our case, for our proposal, in total 3 rounds on comments have been collected, and more or less as reported in this graph, elaborated for a plenary section of WPMN in September 2020, they can be grouped into 4 main categories. And in particular, nanomaterial detection and analysis, in vitro in vivo correlation, and synergies of our project with other ongoing projects at WPMN and WNT. This is a very important point. A specific teleconference was organized in this respect in order to harmonize output of different projects, in particular focused of dissolution in water and relevant biological media of nanomaterials. In general, many countries, many member states propose some question demonstrating the interest of our proposal for WPMN delegation. Another important issue is the establishment of a national international network to support the proposal. In our case, we have been able to count on a robust internal framework from scientific point of view, from scientific and financial point of view also. And in particular, given that the ISS is the scientific and technical body of the Ministry of Health, ISS and the Ministry of Health have common objectives and strong interconnection. For this reason, in the early phase of the proposal, proposal, the Italian Ministry of Health supported two preliminary, from the financial point of view, two preliminary studies related to the proposal. In addition, as for Rachel, the national coordinator is an ESS colleague, and as already said, is very important because a good and friendly interaction with him is essential to the success of the project. Concerning the EU level, also a good discussion was performed about this proposal in Malta initiative and with several experts derived from ongoing research European research protocol, but above all with the NanoHarmony project that was financed in the autumn of 2019 and in which our proposal is present as task 1.8. As already remembered, the objective NanoHarmony project is to reinforce the scientific basis of OECD proposal. Very briefly, our proposed approach want to investigate intestinal fate of nanomaterial once ingested, coupling two in vitro steps when related to simulated digestion. I don't know if you can see my pointer. Simulated digestion, and the other one to nanomaterials uptake translocation through an advanced in vitro model of intestinal barrier. Furthermore, analytical detection as well as in vitro in vivo correlation are taken into account. Moreover, the production of new experimental data in support to the guidance document is also planned by interlaboratory comparison studies performed in the framework of NanoHarmony activities. And as reported in this timeline, NanoHarmony activities are strongly linked with the OECD timeline. Also, this timeline has been reported in the other presentation, and there is a OECD WPMN zone in which the preliminary proposal and the draft of SPSF is discussed, and then the project moves towards the WNT zone, the WNT area, in which the SPSF is discussed. In both cases, NanoHarmony project cover the whole process of the OECD timeline. So far, our proposal is in this point of the timeline. Very fast because I have just minutes. I would like also to emphasize the importance of the expert group. In our case, it was established immediately following the proposal submission to the WPMN and was implemented later. In particular, very important are the organization of the two NanoHarmony expert workshop in November 2020, mainly focused on data gap analysis, and in November 2021, aimed to experimental protocols set up for round robin performing round robins. And in both cases, a lively and very useful discussion was performed, very important for our purposes. My last slides concern the phase in which we are now, that is the preparation of SPSF. This preparation started at WPMN exactly 1 year ago, in April 2021. A first round was submitted to WPMN in a formal way. We collected a first round of comments in June during the plenary discussion of WPMN. The SPSF was officially presented. There was some answers to the comments. Another round of comments were collected after WPMN, and a final teleconference with the discussion of all comments was performed in October. After this teleconference, SPSF was approved by WPMN, and then we performing the submission to WOT in the correct time, that is in the mid-November of the 2021. At this moment, we are ready to the plenary section of WNT in April of this year. We have already collected a round of comment. We hope that during WNT, this our proposal will be approved. That is all for the moment. Thank you for your attention. Okay. Excellent. I'm ready for the question.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Isabella. Perfect timing.
Thank you, Klaus.
I don't see any questions yet, so I'll start. The last bit you're saying is the nervous bit, I guess, in terms of we put it in, we're getting some first round of comments back, and we have to kind of get it right before we hit the plenary at the WNT. I'm guessing the problem would be if you miss that, you go over another year, because it only happens once a year, unless there's mild disagreement, in which case I guess you are allowed to do it on paper afterwards. How do you see those comments coming in, and how you've dealt with the commenting rounds before, during the earlier commenting rounds within WNMP? WPMN, I always get that wrong. Is it all scientific, or is there a lot of it that's also political, where you have to get the sort of regulator or industry partners within the expert group to comment? Sorry, you're muted, Isabella, if you're answering, and I can't see your camera either.
Sorry, sorry,
right.
because my... can you repeat the question? Pardon, because I... Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, now
yeah.
yes.
Okay.
I have some trouble.
So my question is, for the commenting rounds, is all the comments science, or is there some of it that's more political, where really you need the regulators and industry and other people in your expert group to take the lead on the responses, or is it mostly scientific questions that come up?
For the moment, they are mostly scientific. I share these comments with the other groups involved in our proposal, in particular ECAM Research IT, because some questions are really very specific from the scientific point of view. But they are, yes, they are scientific, not political. This is my experience for the moment.
Good. And you said you were already geared up for the round robin. That obviously, we all get invitations to join them, but then they rarely come with money. So how did you manage to fund those exercises and get the people involved in them, or that you wanted to invite involved and funded?
Money is really a problem for round robin. Concerning the national group, they are partially funded by Ministry of Health, as I already says, because they funded the two projects, one specifically focused on experiment on simulated digestion, then the money derived from this project. From other groups involved in round robin, from the cellular part, one or two are already involved in NanoHarmony as a list, and also Solvay, and they have some money from this this project because NanoHarmony funded in some way round robin and give some money for the experiment. For the other, no, it's the voluntary participation. Then they have to have personal fund for performing the experiments. The only thing that nanomaterials used for this round robin will be derived from GRC repository, and they are shared with all the partners, and also digested sample that will be tested in cellular model will be obtained from these samples, and we shared with other participants. And the could be important, but the nanomaterial part is free of money because it's furnished by the project.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Just to bring Rachel and Maria Louisa back in again as well. Rachel said some of the questions had surprised you once you were getting to the WNT stage of things in terms of being, as you said, softly political and not that easy to answer. Having had the questions and given there's these gateways that you kind of have to make unless you want to spend a year commenting again, are there any lessons from those questions that come in terms of you could have prepared better, or things you missed within the project proposal or the SPSF preparation that you just didn't think of, but that kind of seems obvious after the fact?
Not so much in this sense. I mean, I think one of the things I would say is we had an ongoing set of questions about terminology all the way through that we couldn't really address because they were sort of semi-contradictory amongst them, so we couldn't please everybody. And I think that was one of the things that it would have been in some ways nicer if there was a little bit more OECD terminology around. I suppose what in relation to the odd questions that the odd responses we had and comments in the final SPSF round, I think the main thing was they came from I don't really want to say who, but they came from people who had not engaged in the process previously. So I think knowing what I know now, I think I would make more of an effort to try and gauge their views earlier on in the process. It wasn't that we hadn't forgotten them, but because they hadn't raised any issues. And I think that's the concern sometimes, that I think what you have to appreciate is that the people involved in WPMN and WNT, probably even more so, can be very, very busy. So sometimes they don't, mostly if they're not engaging, that's because they're quite happy and they've heard good things from other people and they're happy with their overall judgments. But very occasionally it's because they're very, very busy doing other things and something slips through that afterwards they're less happy with. So I think it's useful to look back and think, who have I not spoken to, who has not engaged so far and why, and just sort of double check.
So some kind of survey monkey saying, are you happy? So you know which ones are not happy, kind of thing, or didn't respond. Yeah.
If only it was that easy.
Yeah.
But yes.
Well, you can't, it's hard to get a positive, a no comment kind of thing.
Yeah, but I think sometimes with these later comments, they are trying to make but you have to also accept that they are sometimes trying to make a point to other people. It's not particularly always about your project. They're trying to make some wider points about what they think is not acceptable about various projects and things. So right. I think that,
well, that's probably best left to the other experts, not the scientific experts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Maria Louisa, any lessons from your commenting rounds, which I guess is the bit that is not in your own control within this, the scientific bit we're sort of in control of.
For us it was in a scientific base, maybe to be more precise on some aspects or more details, but nothing very difficult. For instance, the title has been changed. It wanted to reflect that it's a revision of the guidance document, these kind of things, or maybe to cite the nanomaterials we were working with, or technical issues and clarifications.
I don't mind technical issues and clarifications. They scare me less than the sort of curveball from the angle I wasn't expecting. So, Isabella, any last comments? Otherwise, we can go through the last Mentimeter slides, and then there's a pickup slide at the end for any other comments.
No, specific comments. No, a general comments that is for me is this experience is absolutely very positive, and I would like to suggest to have more courage people in order to start with this process. It is really complicated, but on the other side, I grow a lot in order to think. No, it's important from the scientific point of view to think in a regulatory way and to try to connect the two aspects. So I suggest to all the people to try to move their brain towards this connection and to start. Obviously, is need to have a good team, because it's impossible to work alone, but is absolutely a very important experience.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. And I think you've all reflected that the team really is important, and it's not just the science team; it's also the national team, because it has to
absolutely
be sponsored from a nation. And then co-sponsored if you can. Good, thank you all very much. I see nothing in the chat, so I will hand over to Sean to kind of just pick up the summary at the end through Mentimeter. Thank you all for really good.
Thank you, Klaus. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Klaus. And there is, as you said, a final wrap-up question if people have any further pressing issues. But we're just moving back onto Mentimeter again. So again, if you just go to www.menti.com and use the code that's there on the screen, and again, Nicolina's put it in the chat, so you can look at it there. And we've just got a few quick sort of final questions on Mentimeter before we have an opportunity to sort of pick up any last points. So the first question is more just to try and judge what sort of level of experience people have had actually with the OECD test guideline program. And this will relate back to the previous question where people are told us which category they kind of belong to. So we get some idea about that. But I'll leave this one up for a little while just to let people respond. So just leave this up for just a few seconds longer to let people have the opportunity to reply to the question. And I think we're up to sort of about 2/3 of the people, Klaus, so I shall move.
Yeah, that makes sense.
On rapidly. And this is a really simple one. It's do people think that the current phase 1 process could actually be more efficient or quicker, or do you think that it's about the right speed now? And this is a simple yes no kind of question. again, I'll just leave this one up for a couple more seconds. I kind of think, again, we've got about 2/3 kind of response. So the next question is, again, do you think there may be difficulties with the recruiting or nominating the right experts to support a test guideline or guidance development? And there's several possible answers to this. Yes, you've experienced it, have not experienced it, but have heard about it, no, or indeed don't know. And we can leave this up for just a few seconds more for people to get their answers in. And again, I think we're up to probably the maximum we're going to get. And then just one final question, which is Klaus said this is the, oh no, sorry, tell a lie, we've got 2 more questions. This question is really to look to where would people expect future test guidelines to actually emerge from? So this is to try and give us some idea of whether you expect test guidelines to emerge from funded projects such as the Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe projects, industrial demand for test guidelines, regulatory bodies' demands for test guidelines, policymakers' demands, researchers or scientists independent of a project, or from NGOs or similar organisations. I'll just leave this one up for a few seconds longer.
It'll take a bit longer, and then remember to click submit if you think you've finished.
And just another sort of 10 seconds on this one, because I think we've got about half the people, slightly more than half. So I think we've probably got as many people as we're going to get now. And then definitely the final sort of question. This is an opportunity, as Klaus said, if anybody has any other issues they feel hasn't actually been raised at this point. And really this is, if there's anything else that you're aware of that hasn't already been mentioned in the discussion or in one of the presentations, but any sort of issues, or indeed, and I'm sure if Klaus is happy, if anybody has any questions or any points or comments, what we're really after is to sort of understand where people feel that there's barriers or challenges at the phase 1, and then we can sort of take all these into consideration. But Klaus, I'll leave this question open, and there's only one more slide just to let you know, which is just to let people know about the next webinar, but I'll leave it to you to say when you're happy to move on to that.
Yeah, good. So this is really a case of both capturing if you had any questions that we didn't cover that you thought of now, or indeed if you are the happy or unhappy holder of an experience from phase 1 that we haven't dealt with, either barrier or trick that you used, how to get over it, or a hindsight experience that you think would be worth sharing. Obviously, if you come up with them later, you can email us. Small country, large country participation, when they participate, conduct yeah, so the conducting of the round robin is tricky because that takes lots of lab time and resources. Things like availability of experts, I think, is maybe more organization bound, and also most of the expert volunteering I've done myself, at least, has been through funded EU projects where I've been asked to do it and had the resources to do it, but that's not quite enough for the round robin test. So those, I think, needs resourcing. I'd agree that many researchers involved in method development are not aware of the OECD, and I think Isabella's comments and motivational speech is worth bearing in mind, because I don't think there's anything more satisfying than seeing what you've done in the lab actually hit the coalface and really get used in anger by people. You might have to learn to accept that you shouldn't let the good get away and let the perfect get in the way of the good. Sometimes it can't quite be as scientifically elegant as you wanted it to be, because it has to be reproducible and translatable to a wide audience of labs to be able to deliver it. Clear transition plan to fully replace. Yeah, that's an interesting question, because that's not really up to the OECD to set that out. They can provide the test guidelines that enable this. And I think this is, which comes first? We have to have the OECD in vitro testing guidelines accepted before policies can change and stop asking for the evidence based on we need the in vivo tests before we can step back from the in vitro tests. Other way around, too late now. Clear regulation needed, purpose defined. Yeah, so that's the case of where does it come from? Is it a scientific idea, or is it a need that's already there? I think what all these people today have shown is that you need to talk to the people at the national level in terms of, I have this idea, is there need? Possibility for assessing other options and test guidelines. Yeah, so guidance, indeed, if there is, as Maria Luisa showed, if there are test guidelines there that just needs modifying, it'll be a faster process to go through, but speedily deliver a guidance document that says how that can be used more appropriately for new technology. Losing it now. I don't know how to get that one to go away and see the other ones. As regulators, we need test guidelines to come. I don't know whether the person that is the regulator, there we go, thank you. As regulators, we need test guidelines to come online as soon as possible. This process needs to be as efficient and effective as possible. Good examples of particle size that TG still isn't published and has taken a long time. Yes, so it would be interesting to go back and look at why that's taken such a long time. Where are the comments that are stopping it going through approval coming from, and what are they? And could we perceivably foresee such comment for other techniques as they go through the review processes? Have we covered funding? Yes, funding. And I guess that's where we kind of got to the Malta project and initiative from. That funding was missing in translating the test guidelines that came out of EU projects, or were available in not the test guidelines, the techniques that were available at the end of 4-year EU projects, how to get them successfully translated into test guidelines and guidance documents. That funding isn't there. It's not for the OECD to do it. It's not for the EU to do it through the research programs. So the Malta initiative was a compromise between the two. But really, as the OECD runs, it is for national governments to fund that development, and as they sponsor a guideline going through, which obviously takes some time to get a governmental approval for such funding. We did it in the UK, and it took us 1.5 years because we were too slow for the first funding round for 1 year, so we ended up going into the next year. I think that's probably all of them. Unless I don't know whether you can see more than I can, Sean. I think that's it. Good. Right, which lets you take it on to the last slide, Sean, and tell people what we're doing on Star Wars Day.
Yes, indeed. As you said, Klaus, the next webinar is planned for the 4th of May. We're just waiting to confirm that date. And that webinar will be looking at one of the projects we've described as phase 2 and 3, which is the technical development and commenting and approval rounds as the test guideline sort of moves away from WPMN and into WNT.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And as I said, if there are any other things that come up as you think about this driving home, please email Sean or me, and we'll add them to the comments from this webinar so they can get into the legacy. We will find somebody to address the question or issue and then bring it back to you. And I'd like to just again, for all of us, to thank the speakers we had. Hopefully soon we can start doing some things like this live, but actually it is really useful to be able to bring people around an event like this without everybody having to fly and get there. So, you know, it was amazing to have 60 people here out of the 100 that registered their interest. So thank you very much, and we will hopefully see you on May the 4th.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.